I think if you've ever been in a position where you haven't been included and you've felt like you've had to hide a part of yourself, then you do get passionate about being able to be your authentic self.
Absolutely.
For you, but also for the other people around you as well. You can't look at someone and say you don't look autistic. And in neurodiverse individuals, their brains are wired differently, so you can actually pick it up on scan. So you can, if you put somebody through an MRI scanner, you will see the differences in how their brain functions or the neurological paths function compared to somebody who is neurotypical.
Today's guest is my dear friend Emma Lewis, a clinical research professional who is a mother of 3 neurodiverse daughters. Throughout her parenting journey, Emma struggled to connect with her daughters and make the family dynamic work. Once Emma reached the perimenopause, her world fell apart with a catastrophic mental breakdown. It has only been working through her own mental wellness that Emma is now exploring her own neurodiversity. Emma speaks about her experiences of the menopause, losing and regaining her identity, and parenting in neurodiverse families. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you, Anita. It's lovely to be here.
It's my pleasure. What is one of the most courageous things you have done?
Oh gosh, I feel like I've been very courageous throughout my life. I'm a kind of feel the fear and do it anyway sort of person.
Excellent.
I think will have one of those attitudes where I look forward and I don't let the adversity that I've experienced dictate my future. But I think there's so many things. I've jumped out of planes. I think the hardest thing that I've done is probably running 100 marathons, because I started running in my 30s because I used to see people running past the house and think, I'd love to be able to do that. And I started teaching myself to run, couldn't do more than 30 seconds, Then this is way before we Catch to 5K. Then I got to 3 miles, and then I got to 6 miles, and then I did a half marathon. And I thought I'd really love to run a marathon. It's just like something that's always been there. I used to watch the London Marathon and think, I'd love to do that. So I signed up to do Reading Half, and I finished that, and I was ecstatic. And I thought, I'm going to apply for a marathon. And getting into London is really difficult because it's through a ballot. So there was a marathon in the September called the New Forest Marathon, and I persuaded a friend to run it with me. And when I finished it, it was such a fantastic feeling. I thought, I've got to do this again.
Excellent. I mean, I can only imagine. I've put in to do the London Marathon 3 times and didn't get in myself. So absolutely, it must have been a fantastic feeling.
Yeah, and I've run London 4 times now. I've been really lucky that I've been able to. I actually have secured places in the ballot twice, which has been great. And I have run for charities and done quite a lot in that way. And I got bitten by the bug, and there is this whole sub community of people who run marathons pretty much every day of the week. So I decided I was going to go for the 100 marathons, and that is, every week. Pretty much I was running 2 marathons a month for 3 years. So it was pretty much getting up at 4:30 in the morning on a Saturday, driving to the event, running the event, driving home. It was all consuming and very tiring. So I think for someone who's a really slow runner, who is never particularly athletic, to take on something like that, I think you have to be quite courageous to be able to do something like that.
Absolutely. Well done. I can't imagine, to be honest, 2 a month. Are you insane?
There are people who do it every day of the week. Honestly, I think 3 in a week, 4 in a week is probably my highest I've done. But there are people who run 10 in 10 days. There are people. What I do is tiny compared to the people who are on the circuit all the time, who've run 400, 500, 600, 700 marathons. Some of them have run over 100 in 1 year. So yeah. It's a little subculture in the UK that you don't normally see unless you get involved with it.
Yes, definitely. So tell me more about yourself and how you came to be an ally and an advocate of inclusion?
Growing up, and I've spoken about this before, being a girl, your experience is that you're treated different from boys. And I very much felt that I was not different. In fact, I felt like in some areas I was better. So I couldn't understand why I was being excluded from things like sports. I wanted to play rugby, and it was something that I wasn't allowed to do. And I think there has always been this part of me that has been drawn to supporting people. And as I got older, I've had children of my own. I had quite difficult birth experiences. I had an emergency cesarean with my first, and there's the whole story behind that. And I had, with my second, I had to have an elective. I had gestational diabetes, and that was a really hard and difficult experience for me. I didn't want another cesarean, and nobody listened to me. Absolutely nobody. I cried for a week. My midwife would, tap me on the shoulder and say it'll all be fine. It's it'll be very straightforward. It'll be a different experience from your first one. Nobody said to me, well, okay, if you don't want to have the cesarean, let's watch and wait. Let's monitor the baby every day. Let's see if you go into spontaneous labour. Let's do what we can to give you that birth. They just railroaded me into it, and I felt completely disempowered and not listened to. So with my third, I hired an independent midwife, and I refused consultant care in the NHS. And it was the first time in my life I really advocated for myself. My midwife gave me lots of information about home birth and birthing after cesareans, and I made a decision for myself that I wanted to birth at home. And I spent 3 hours in clinic. I remember it, being there with them, trying to persuade me that I should give birth in hospital. And they did something which is kind of known as shroud waving, where they play on your vulnerability as a pregnant woman and tell you that you are putting your baby at risk and your baby will die if you do it. And of course that frightens you into wanting to give birth in hospital, but I didn't. I stuck to my guns, and I had a home birth. I had a water birth at home with my third, and everything was fine. It was long and hard, but it was fine. And following that, I started volunteering with the NCT, the National Childbirth Trust, supporting women who were having difficult pregnancies, coming to terms with it. I was part of a hotline that people could phone and speak to someone who'd experienced something similar to them and have a conversation about it. And also my midwife started referring people to me and saying, I've got a client and they want to have a vaginal birth after cesarean. Will you speak to them about your experience? And from there, I actually went on to do my doula training. So I was a birth doula. So I became a certified doula, and I supported women to have birth. So I was coaching women to birth, to get ready for their birth, but then I was also supporting them through the physical process of birth as well, which was, really incredibly rewarding. So I suppose that was really my start of becoming an ally and becoming an advocate. And then, as I've spoken about in my bio, as my parenting journey went on, I really, really struggled, and subsequently found out that my children are neurodiverse in various combinations. And I've had to really advocate for them at school to be able to get the right support in the education system. So I guess that's how my journey to make sure that everybody gets included, specifically for my children having special education needs. They don't fit into the mold of mainstream school, and a lot of the things that they experience are not well understood, and they get labelled as disruptive and difficult children. And I've had to fight really hard to make sure that they've had access to mainstream education, and I still do. Myself and another mum at the school where my children attend have started a Facebook support group. We have I think 66 parents on there from the school who are all experiencing difficulties, and we provide peer support, and we also act as, myself and the other mum act as a liaison with the school to be able to take some of the concerns that parents have had and work with the school to put something in place which is going to support the children better.
Definitely. Oh, that's fantastic. And For anyone that's listening that doesn't know what neurodiverse is, can you just explain a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So neurodiverse is like an umbrella term, but it covers quite a few things. So it's a neurological difference. We call people generally in the population, we call neurotypical is the usual, and then neurodiverse is something slightly different. So it includes things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, OCD. So it covers a ADHD. It covers this broad range of neurological differences. Down syndrome is also included in there.
Okay.
And in neurodiverse individuals, their brains are wired differently. So you can actually pick it up on scan. So you can, if you put somebody through an MRI scanner, you will see the differences in how their brain functions or the neurological paths function compared to somebody who is neurotypical.
That's excellent.
So you often hear people say, oh, we're all a little bit autistic, but no, we're not. We do, obviously, autism is a variation of human. Same as ADHD, same as dyslexia, they're all a variation of human. So of course there are some similarities, but to be autistic, you have to meet criteria on 3 different areas, and they have to have a significant impact on your life to get your diagnosis. So you have to have problems with social communication, interaction, reciprocal social communication, interaction. You also have to have problems, difficulties with sensory processing. Is another area that they look at when they're assessing you. So it's not that we're all a little bit autistic. We're not at all, and it can be picked up on scan. And actually, there are genes for autism that can be identified, but that's a whole other can of worms that the autistic community don't want opened.
Yes, and I can understand how it can be challenging for sure. I mean, having 3 daughters that are neurodiverse. So what are the daily challenges that you find? What's the impact on the daily life you have?
Yeah, it's massive, really. I think people don't. So to say that girls are often not picked up, and this is really common, is that girls will not be picked up until they hit puberty, generally speaking. So my eldest is autistic with dyslexia and dyspraxia. My second is autistic with ADHD. She also has generalized anxiety, emotional dysregulation, and an eating disorder. And then my third is going through the assessment pathway at the moment, but it looks like she's autism, ADHD, dyslexia. So when they were little, especially my first, I knew there was something different because I was going to NCT classes, and we all had our babies, and then we'd meet up afterwards, and my daughter was not hitting the same milestones as the other children. So in terms of speaking, she was a late speaker. She didn't speak until she was nearly 3. And when she did start speaking, she started speaking in full sentences. So she didn't start with like odd words. She just didn't say anything. And then within 6 months, she was, talking fluently. But I knew she was very bright. So at 14 months old, she could do a 35-piece jigsaw puzzle by herself.
Wow.
So she was only just sort of standing, and she would take the pieces and look at them and then match the shape and the colour. And I would watch her and think, oh my God, that's just amazing that she can do that. And subsequently, actually, when she went to high school, they do this thing called CATS tests. So they're cognitive ability tests to see it's like an intelligence test to see where their level of ability is when they start putting you in sets. And she scored really highly. And actually, in the test she had for her dyslexia, her visuospatial awareness is in the top 1% of the population, which is why she finds jigsaw so easy, because her visuospatial awareness is so good. But the challenges for us growing up for her was that she really struggled in loud sounds and things, loud spaces where there were loud noises. So she started at school, and in the first week, the teacher said to me, you really need to speak to her, because when we're having circle time and we're all sat on the carpet for a story, she puts her hands over her ears like this. And I was mortified. I was upset. She said, I just thought, oh gosh, why isn't she doing what everybody else is doing? Never occurred to me that there was a problem in terms of, how she was coping with the sounds in the classroom, that she was feeling overwhelmed. And I raised it a few times over her growing up, and it was dismissed. And then she got to high school. In her year 6, they just said, everything's average, she's fine. And I'm thinking, she's not an average kid. She's a very bright kid, but she's only doing average. There must be something here. Eventually, in the first year of high school, I really pushed, and with the learning support group, and they agreed to do a screen for dyslexia. And that was the first neurological difference that she was diagnosed with. So at 13, she was formally assessed, and she came back as being dyslexic. She has problems with her working memory being very poor. Her short-term memory is very poor. She can't infer, which is a common thing with autism. So she won't understand the subtleties in communication at all. She's got better at understanding sarcasm because she's learned that, but she doesn't infer. So, and she couldn't read. She would read, so she could memorize words, but she can't break down a new word and sound it out phonologically. She can't do that. And she has problems with verbal processing. So she would read a book, like a line in a book that said something like, the dog went to the supermarket to buy a loaf of bread. And you or I might go, well, that's a bit odd. Why is a dog going to a supermarket to buy a loaf of bread? But she would read the words, but have no comprehension at all of what those words meant. So she never read any fiction books or anything like that. And I used to find that really distressing, because I'm a big, big reader. And the fact that my child didn't read was really distressing for me. And everybody said, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But eventually it was, she's dyslexic, so she needs support with that. And then when we got to 13, she obviously gone through puberty. She was having problems with relationships at school, not fitting in, not finding friends. She was bullied. She was assaulted. She started to get, a lot of anxiety. She was self-harming. She had suicidal ideation. She was referred to CAMS. She was tested for ADHD, and they said, no, it's not ADHD. And we discussed autism, and they said, no, it's not, because she's too well presented, which is a complete nonsense. And so she continued to struggle. And between the ages of 16 and 18, her and I had many conversations. She's highly sensitive, for a start. She would walk into a room where there were desks that were brown, and it would make her feel sick. And I would say, oh, don't be ridiculous, this is just another excuse not to go to school. But I later found out that that's part of her sensory processing. So she has a form of synesthesia that means that it basically means your senses are mixed up. So whereas you or I might look at a colour and see colour, she actually has a physical response to that. She also has problems with what they call proprioception, a difficult word to say, which means the internal signals from her body are misread as well. So she can't tell when she needs to go to the toilet until her bladder is so full that she's in pain. And that's how she knows, because her body doesn't interpret the sign for I need to go to the toilet. The nerves are there, the sense, all the receptors are there, but her brain doesn't interpret the information. So she's got lots of different bits and pieces going on. So I feel like I'm talking a huge amount and not giving you an opportunity to speak, Anita. But my second daughter was completely different in that she had what I would call, like, she got to sort of 2.5. She was a really, really good baby, slept all the time, because my eldest didn't sleep, but she slept all the time. She was such a good baby. I swaddled her, gave her a dummy, she was off to sleep. But when she got to about 2.5, we changed childcare providers. She went from being one-on-one with a childminder to being in a nursery, and things fell apart for her. And she started having these massive tantrums, which usual parenting methods did not help with. And I reached out to the health visitor and said, I don't know what I'm doing here. Everything I tried with Jessica doesn't work with Amy. I really need to have some help with this. And she gave me lots of tips on different ways of doing things, and that helped for a while. But when she got to 7, she stopped sleeping at night. So really every evening I would be I would take her up to bed and I would be singing to her, I would be stroking her, we would do visualizations, we would read stories, I was all the time, and I'd be there from 7 o'clock at night till 11 o'clock and she still wouldn't be asleep. And it would get to the point where she would get up out of bed and come downstairs and I would just say, go to bed. And you just need to go to sleep now. You've had everything you need, just go to sleep. And she would say to me, I can't sleep. And I would say, well, you can't sleep standing on the stairs, go to bed. And, it was exhausting. And this went on for years, literally years of me not having any time alone in the evening, constantly being with her being very distressed and getting very upset, me being very distressed and getting very upset. And again, spoke to school, said, please help me. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, she was I say tantrums, they're not tantrums. I found out now they're meltdowns, but at the time, they were explosive. We hid the knives because we were worried that she was going to grab one and stab her sister or one of us. She would kick me, she would hit me. It was physically very draining, emotionally very draining all the time. And all you get is you just need to put stronger boundaries in place. That, this is a behavior issue, and nobody spoke to me. And I brought up again autism, brought it up again, and it was ignored. I was told, no, she's absolutely fine at school. It's only we only see these behaviors at home. But actually what autistic children do is they mask. So, and the girls are really good at this. So they go to school, they act the same as all the other children, but the energy it takes to do that, they get home, they completely melt down because they've been subjected to all this stimulation during the day and they can't cope with it. So they come home and they melt down. And this is what was happening with my second daughter. She was having these catastrophic meltdowns in the evening that I was dealing with, and they weren't seeing anything at school.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it is a lot to be taking on. And then they wonder why she's fine at school.
Yeah. And you do feel like a terrible parent. When my eldest was little, I really wanted to play with her, but I didn't know how to play with her. And I thought, well, I'm the product of the 70s. My mum didn't play with me. We just entertained ourselves. So, that's the way that it was. And I thought, well, maybe that's why I don't know how to play with her. I didn't get it when I was a child, so I don't know how to do it. But now I know that the reason why they have difficulty in playing is because of their autism. So they don't role play they can actually, some autistic children can be incredibly good at role play, and a lot of them end up being actors or comedians. Others can't do it at all. So they will line toys up. So my children would not take a car and go brum, 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 and drive the car. They would line the cars up. Or with baby dolls, they would dress them and put them in the pushchair, but that was the extent of their play with them. They wouldn't want to pretend that they were a mum, pretend to feed the baby. They just didn't understand that part of what you do when you're playing. So that was one of the reasons why I was struggling with them. And also they've got lots of sensory issues. So at home, we're all very sensory seeking in my family. So wanting to touch things, brush against things, choosing clothes for their texture. Second one has problems with labels. They all need to be cut out, can't wear tight clothes. They all have these specific sort of sensations that they get when they put clothes on, so they are very specific about what they wear. But also at the dinner table, they would. Oh, yeah. And at the dinner table, it was like, she's making a noise chewing. So they've got, my second one has got a really heightened sense of smell. So certain food smells put her off. They all have restrictive, repetitive eating habits. So sitting down having a meal as a family was incredibly challenging, because they would all get distressed and have meltdowns in various different ways, to the point where I just gave up doing it because it just was so upsetting for everybody. Meal times is that we just stopped doing it. And then I felt like a failure as a mum, because I couldn't have my children sit at the dinner table together and have a meal like other families did. So what was I doing wrong? My eldest was only diagnosed when she was 19. Eventually, it just got to the point where it was affecting her life so much. She wasn't able to socialize in the same way as her friends. She felt different all the time. And I was, I guess, lucky. I separated from my ex-partner. We sold the house. I had some savings, so I was able to pay for her to have her assessment, and she was diagnosed immediately. And the psychiatrist who did her diagnosis really sort of explained to me why her presentation of autism, why it hadn't been picked up, why it's very common in girls for it not to be picked up until puberty or later. And then from that, we realised that that's what was happening with my second daughter, and she went through the assessment process as well. And now we're going through the assessment process with number 3.
Gosh, that's absolutely one incredible journey for sure. And you're still going through it. I can't imagine. That's, really credit to you for not stopping and not just accepting, continuing. And like you say, an exhausting time, full stop. And especially, okay, as parents, we don't sleep when they're little, but not to be able to sleep even when they're older. How on earth did you manage?
I think when you're in the middle of it, you just get on with it, and you just think, oh, this will stop one day it will happen. And when she turned about 13, 14, she started, well, actually I got to the point where I said, right, I don't care if you're awake all night, but I need to sleep. So I'm going to bed at this time. Before that, I'm available to you. After that, I'm not. So if you want anything from me, then you need to have it before 10 o'clock, which is when I went to bed. When actually, now that she's got her diagnosis, she actually has medication to sleep. So she has melatonin every night. And the first night she took it, the house was silent for the first time. And I sat down and watched a television program uninterrupted for the first time since she was 7. So yeah, it was like magic melatonin. Yes. It was brilliant.
Yeah. Can imagine.
And she's actually on ADHD medication now as well, which makes a huge difference. So what was happening was that her brain doesn't switch off. So there are thoughts running through her head all the time. And of course, at night, that's louder because there aren't other distractions, and she's had a day of functioning in the world and is overwhelmed. So when she comes home, all of that is going on. So that's why she finds it difficult to sleep. So the combination of the medication she has medication for anxiety, for her ADHD, and then for sleep, and the 3 things together have really helped her. I know a lot of people worry about giving their children medication, but it has been life-changing for her. Without the medication, she can be very, with the ADHD, they can be very risk-taking, very impulsive, and at risk of harming herself. So we have to, it's definitely safer for her to be on medication, and she functions much better in the world and is happier because of it.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, you've just shown, you've shared the example of that. So that's absolutely beautiful. And I know you've spoken in the past about your experiences of perimenopause and the menopause. Can you tell me the impact that's had on you as a person? To be honest, you've got the children, and this has had a big impact in your life as well.
Yeah, I think I function very well in the world. I've had things happen to me, but I've always been very positive. I've had a good career. Relationships I've struggled with, and friendships I struggle with. But, I've never really thought about it hugely. And with the perimenopause and menopause, I had this catastrophic breakdown. And it was like going to sleep one morning and waking up, and everybody else in the world spoke a different language, and I couldn't understand it anymore. And so there are times at work where I would be listening to what people are saying and thinking, I don't understand what you need me to do. And I was like, this is not like me. And through my exploration because I've spent a lot of time educating myself on autism and ADHD and neurological differences, and through my understanding of my children, I've realized there are some things for myself as well. And actually, I did a little bit of digging into the scientific literature, and there is some early literature that says that with girls, through puberty and through the menopause, the fluctuations in hormones exacerbate the neurological differences. So the neurodiversity piece. So girls who have, there's a whole swathe of women who are 45 plus who are now being diagnosed with ADHD and autism. Because all of the coping mechanisms they've had no longer function when they hit the menopause. And I think, and they go into something what's called autistic burnout, and then have real problems with their mental health. And I thought, well, this could be something that's happening to me. So I actually work with a CBT specialist who specialises in supporting children with autism, and she supported my eldest, and I started working with her, and I did the initial screens for autism, and I come out just inside the autistic scoring, and she said, you're right on the edge there, so it's not enough for me to say you are or you aren't, but I would recommend that you go forward for assessment if that's important to you. And I said, no, it's not really at the time. I don't think it's something that I need to I understand myself quite well. But I carried on working with her as a practitioner, and it became very clear while we were working together that I do have some neurodiversities that probably indicate that I am autistic.
Yes. Yeah, I can see that.
So one of the things that I always said to her, I don't have problems with sensory issues because my children have lots of sensory issues. But I was a really picky eater as a child, and I didn't eat lots of foods willingly at all. I didn't choose to eat eggs until I was in my I was like past 25. Didn't eat strawberries until I was in my 30s, And even now, if you challenged me to eat something that I wasn't familiar with, I wouldn't be able to do it. It would make me gag. I wouldn't be able to put it in my mouth. So I do definitely have sensory issues with food. It is to do with the texture. I overshare. I am a very black and white thinker, which I didn't think I was. But I'm either fully engaged with something or I'm completely switched off from it. So, and I blanket everything in the same way. So if I've had a bad experience with a doctor, for example, then I will completely disengage. And you can see that from my birth experiences, is that I had bad experiences with the hospital. So I completely disengaged and I went with an independent midwife and I just separated the two. So there are a few indicators of that. And I'm now just starting on a course with a local autism charity called Auto Angels, which is called Exploring Being Autistic. And it's an opportunity for me to speak to other adults and explore that part of me and, whether or not I am autistic, which
definitely that's excellent. Yeah, you're getting the help you need, which is brilliant. So what is the biggest learning that you would like the listeners to take away from this discussion?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of neurodiversity. You can't look at someone and say you don't look autistic because you don't know what's going on inside of them. If you saw my daughters in the street, you probably would not initially think that, but actually it affects them hugely on a daily basis in terms of their functioning. They need support with medication for anxiety. They can't, my eldest is at university now, but she doesn't go out partying the way that other students do. She has to balance herself and her energy levels to make sure that her mental health stays well. She just still misunderstands communication, and that will always be with her. That's never going to go away. So she needs someone to help her with emails and making sure that she understands instructions. You don't realize how difficult government forms are. When you have to fill in a form.
Believe you me, being dyslexic, I understand. That's my pet hate, filling in forms.
They are so terrible. Honestly, they're awful, and so she needs a lot of day-to-day support with things to make sure she doesn't miss things. Autistic people struggle with executive functioning the same way as ADHD people do. So they need, they may not be able to, my eldest has a very structured routine to keep her on track and uses alarms a lot. So she wouldn't remember to clean her teeth unless you set an alarm to do it. So executive functioning.
I do use a lot of alarms. Yes.
Yeah. And so definitely. There are ways around it. And also, people who are neurodiverse are incredibly, they have a different perspective on the world to everybody else. So they bring different ideas. They bring perceptions. I mean, they have opened up my world hugely to how different things can be and really enriched my world in that way. They've taught me a lot as a person through experiencing the world through their eyes. And they do need extra support and will always do that and will need it in the workplace. but in return, you will have somebody who can be hyper-focused, can be incredibly passionate and diligent, can be really creative, can give you ideas and solutions. So I would say, don't exclude people because of differences, but find ways to include them in the way that works for them.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to know more about your new adventure, being the co-host of the podcast Hidden Voices. So tell me more about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so it's a bit of a passion project for me. In the last few years in the organisation I was working in, I was very highly involved in developing the employee resource group. So I was chair of Pride. I was part of the Women's Network and developed women in leadership program, and I got very heavily involved in inclusion within that, diversity and inclusion in that space, and met some amazing people. And myself and an ex-colleague, we decided it would be a really great opportunity to help other people to hear the stories that we'd heard with these amazing people that we've spoken to. So the podcast really is an opportunity for us to speak to people that we know from our lives who've got amazing stories to tell that you may not usually hear because they don't normally have a platform to be able to speak about their experiences. So we have spoken to yourself and about your dyslexia.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's really great, and it's so important that we do talk about these things. We've spoken to a lovely guy who was in his 20s when he lost his leg in a motorcycle accident, the same day he lost his wife in the same accident. And he's gone on to be a really big advocate for amputees. And, he started his own charity. He's done amazing things. He's so driven and passionate about it. We've spoken to someone who's the head of a charity that supports refugees. We've lots and lots of different stories. And the idea is that, people get to hear a different perspective and understand what it's like for somebody that maybe they don't come across in their usual day-to-day life.
Yes, definitely. And I can see how important it is personally to get the message out there as well.
I think it's, if you've been in a minority at all in your life, whether that is because of your gender, your sexuality, your ability, whatever it is, your ethnicity, you understand what it's like to not be represented. And, I don't get me wrong, I come from a huge place of privilege. I'm a white woman, so I walk through life with more privilege than you do because of the color of my skin, rightly or wrongly. That's the way the world is, that there are certain assumptions people make about me because of that. My daughters do, because although they're autistic, they're white females. And my daughter, when she started at university, she wanted to go to a nightclub, and she wore her lanyard, sunflower lanyard, with her card that says I'm autistic. And she wrote on her phone, because she becomes non-verbal if she's under pressure. So she wrote on her phone a little note to say, I'm autistic. Can you give me some space just for a few minutes so that I can, self-regulate?
Excellent.
And she was in the nightclub. She got completely overwhelmed. She went up to the bouncer and showed him her phone. And he gave her a room that she could go to be quiet for a few minutes to gather herself and just calm down. She has to wear headphones and things and just to self-regulate. And I thought, wow, that's amazing that they've accommodated her. But the next thought I had was, if she'd been male or if she'd been black, or the color of her skin had been different, would she have had the same response from the bouncer? Because she's a white, pretty female, she probably got more leeway than somebody else. So I think if you've ever been in a position where you haven't been included and you've felt like you've had to hide a part of yourself, then you do get passionate about being able to be your authentic self for you, but also for the other people around you as well. And I think that's where my passion comes from, is because of my own experiences.
Yes, absolutely. So what resources do you recommend, daily tools, steps, to anyone who is challenged with inclusion? I mean, I know it's a loaded question, but is there any small tips, daily tips you can recommend here?
I think find your allies is probably your first step. I think everybody's journey is very different, and it's not for
Yes.
me to say you need to be, coming out in the workplace in any way, whether that is whether it's your gender, your sexuality, your neurodiversity. It's your journey, and you've got to decide how much of yourself you want to. And it's the same for employers, actually. You can't just say, oh, okay, we want everybody who is LGBTQ to be open at work. No, it doesn't work like that. It's a personal choice whether or not you do. But what we can say is that if you have to create a safe environment, then people will feel more included. And that's a massive struggle, because there are years and years and years of discrimination. And if you have ever had shown some of yourself to someone and then been discriminated against, you're not going to do it again. And so organizations have got a huge way to go to create that safe space for people to feel like they can really be themselves and feel included in the workspace. So I would say, as an individual, find out about yourself. That's my natural way of doing it. I gather information. I research, I find out. I join organizations, I join Facebook groups, I join local charities, and I find my tribe in that way. And I guess in some ways there's safety in numbers, but actually communicating and talking to people who have the same experiences as you can be incredibly powerful. It can be really validating for you to know that it's not just you, that there is something systemic going on here, and that can give you the power to then feel like you can challenge that system.
Where can the listeners find you online? What's your website and the podcast?
So the website is hiddenvoicespodcast.com, and they can access the podcasts through that. They're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can find me on LinkedIn, Emma Lewis, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. There's also a Hidden Voices Podcast LinkedIn page as well that you can find. And if you want to contact me directly, you can contact me at emma@hiddenvoicespodcast.com.
Excellent. And I'll be putting all the links in the show notes so everybody can actually do that directly. Thank you for sharing your courageous journey with us today. And by doing so, I know you have helped so many others. Emma Lewis.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Anita. So lovely to talk to you as always.
My pleasure. So my final question to you is, because we are Create the Courage to Be Fearless podcast, what is your definition of courage?
Oh, gosh, that's such a good question. I think very simply, it's to take the first step. For me, courage is about action, and don't get caught up in thinking about the perfect time, thinking about everything that needs to be in place. Just, like Nike says, just do it. Take that first step, however small, and that will change direction for you. That will help you move forward in a new direction. So if you are at a crossroads in your life, or you're undecided about what you want to do, just take a step forward. Even if it's the wrong one, it doesn't matter, because you'll learn something along the way. So yeah, my definition of courage would be taking that first step.